Hey everybody, I'm David with the Captain's Coffee, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my beginner's guide to the Fresh Roast SR800. I love this little roaster. I use it nearly every day. I think it's great for beginners who are just getting started with home coffee roasting, and it's got a lot to offer folks who've been roasting for years. So I'm going to break this guide down into 3 sections. First, I'm going to go over all the parts and pieces, how everything works. Then I'm going to share all the tips and tricks, the most important ones that I've picked up over the years using this roaster. And then finally, I'm going to end with a full roast from beginning to end, so you can see the whole process. And so like I said, this is mostly going to be focused on beginners. But even if you've been roasting with this machine for years, I think there's a lot you can pick up. So I hope you enjoy this. Let's get into it. So here we have the SR800 all broken down. In the very middle, you'll see the roasting unit, the base unit. This is the muscles of the operation. It contains the heater and the fan, which blows hot air through here into your roasting chamber, which you can see is perforated at the bottom to allow that air to come through and heat the beans and roast them for us. Over here, we've got the lid, which is in 2 parts. The top has a screen, which prevents the chaff from blowing all over your room, and the chaff collector, which you need to empty every time you finish a roast. And those 2 parts go together using the 2 prongs right here. Simply push them together just like this. They'll snap on each other, and there's a little nifty handle where you can hold them together just like that. Now they sit right on top of the roasting chamber using these 2 little prongs, and they just go on either side of the handle, just like so. Now the actual roasting chamber itself has 2 little indentations on it on either side, and they fit right on top of the indentations on your roaster base just like this. Keep in mind, this is all held together by gravity, so when it's roasting, you don't want to run by, be clumsy, hit it, knock it off. This is glass, it will break, and even the lid will break if you drop it on something hard enough. So I like to move it around in separate pieces until I get it set up where I want it. Finally, let's talk about the base a little bit. So the roasting base has several buttons and functions. Right here is on and off, turns the unit off, on, just like that. And you'll see when it's on, it's got 3 parameters we can adjust. The first one is the fan. Now that controls how much air is flowing into the system, which is important for keeping our beans moving at a nice constant rate. Then we've got in the middle is the power. Now that controls how much electricity is going to the heating element inside the unit, which will, if we increase it, turn up that power, which means turn up the heat. Turn it down if we got too much and we need less. Finally is the timer function. Over there is how much time the unit will run with the current settings before it automatically goes into cooling mode. I personally like to manually control everything with my roast, so we're gonna set it at the highest level, which is 20 minutes, and just leave it there. Then we've got the function button over here. The function button controls all of these parameters. Just punch it down one time, and then again, and you cycle through which one you're adjusting, just like so. And then we turn it to change up or down. And if you want to, during the roast, rotating it quickly clockwise will automatically display the temperature reading of what's coming off the heater as it's entering the roasting chamber, which is really useful for us. Finally, we've got the run and cool button, which if we hit it, begins the roasting process. And if we hit it again during the cycle, we'll automatically enter the cooling phase. Where you choose to roast is really important. The ambient temperature, or the air temperature in your roasting location, can have a big effect on your roast. The SR800 is a powerful roaster, but it's susceptible to really cool or really hot ambient temperatures.
Lots of folks like to roast outside, so they don't have to worry about ventilation, but you're gonna have a tough time getting your beans up to temp if it's really cold out. I even notice a big difference in the amount of time and heat needed to roast at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's cooler than 60 degrees out, I highly recommend you roast inside at room temperature. It'll make your roast a lot more consistent from batch to batch by giving you one less variable to worry about. Don't forget about ventilation though. You can set up right in your kitchen under the stove's exhaust fan with no problems. Just turn the fan on high while roasting. The SR800 doesn't pump out smoke as much as some roasters do, but if you're doing several batches in a row, you can still set off your smoke alarm. Crack a window or two as needed to help with this. Like most home roasters, the SR800 pulls down a lot of juice. It's rated to run up to nearly 15 amps at the highest settings, so it's important to use at least a 20 amp circuit with nothing else running on it. This is a big mistake lots of beginners make. If the roaster can't get enough power, it'll struggle to heat the beans and you'll end up baking your beans instead of roasting them. Check your home circuit breaker to make sure you're using an outlet with at least 20 amps and that the circuit is dedicated to just your roaster. Be sure you're not running any other appliances that might be connected to that circuit while you're roasting. It's important to understand how the fan and the heating element work together to generate hot air to roast your beans. The fan speed is inversely proportional to the amount of heat added into the system. This means the higher your fan setting, the less heat you'll add to the beans as the air is moving too quickly over them for that heat to be absorbed. Another way to explain this is that there are actually two ways to increase the heat in your roaster. One is to increase the power setting. The second is to decrease the fan setting. In fact, I found decreasing the fan has a larger effect on increasing heat in the roaster than by increasing the power. So, if you're having a tough time getting your beans roasted quickly enough or getting the first crack, keep your fan setting just high enough to gently agitate the beans. We don't need them shooting all over the place in order to get our air evenly distributed. Keep in mind that as you roast your beans, they'll become lighter as they dry out, meaning you won't need as much airflow to keep them moving and roasting evenly. You'll be able to reduce the fan setting as your roast goes along, which has the added effect of bringing additional heat into the mix.
All right, so we're all set up and ready to roast. Got 225 grams of green coffee beans. This is a washed Nicaraguan from the El Pastor estate. Load it on in there. Make sure I replace the lid. Everything's good. Let's get to roasting.
So you'll notice when I turn the unit on, I've got the fan set all the way up with the power down to 4 to start with. That's because the beans are their heaviest right now and they need tons of air to move. I also don't want to scorch the bottom layer of beans while they start moving. So, without further ado, let's get started hitting the run cool button. I also highly recommend using a kitchen timer while you're roasting, or even your phone to keep track of how far along you are. It really helps keep better logging, helps make more repeatable and consistent roasts from batch to batch. So right away you're gonna notice we don't have a lot of movement in the roasting chamber. That's okay. Doesn't take long before that high fan setting kicks in. We've got the heat low, like I said, to keep from scorching that bottom layer. Let's give it some time, see what happens. Alright, we're nearly a minute along in the process. We're getting a lot more movement of the beans, which is great. At this point, we're gonna want to start turning down the fan and increasing the power. I'm gonna do one down on the fan and one up on the power to start adding in more heat into the system as we work our way through the drying phase of the roasting process. So as you can see, we're working our way up to the 350 degree mark. More and more heat is coming into the system now that we've turned that fan down and the power up, which is great. We want to stay a little ways ahead of the temperatures that the beans are at. And since the 300 degree mark is going to mark the next stage in the roasting phase, we're staying a little ways ahead of that so that we're adding plenty of momentum into the beans. Right now we're still solidly in the drying phase, which is the part where we are turning the greens from that green bean that we're used to seeing into yellow. And we're gonna start smelling soon a grassy or hay-like smell coming from the roaster. We're getting pretty close to the 2.5 minute mark. There's a lot more movement again in the beans. They're starting to lose some weight. They're getting lighter. And we're about to turn it down once again. Our beans are moving around quite a lot, and we want to keep adding heat in this system. So once again, I'm going to decrease the fan by 1 and increase the power by 1. We're still getting plenty of movement here. We just got that nice gentle agitation. Like I said earlier, we don't need the beans flying everywhere. We just want them gently moving and rotating so they're not scorching and all the beans are getting a fairly even amount of heat. So right around the 4-minute mark, I'm noticing that the beans have turned from light yellow or pale yellow to a light brown. That's because we're leaving the drying phase of roasting and we're beginning the next stage, which is known as the browning phase. It's also called the caramelization or Maillard phase. About a minute into this phase, our beans will really begin to move, as we're starting to see now, and we'll have to make another adjustment. We're coming up on 5.5 minutes, and I'm seeing a lot of activity in the roasting chamber. It's time to consider pulling the fan down a little bit. So I'm going to notch that down one more time. And it's time to decide if I need to add some more heat into the system. I can see we're in the low 400s on the heat going into the roasting chamber, and I don't want to overshoot first crack too much and rush through it. So I'm going to pull back our power a little bit and ease our way into that first crack, knowing that it's going to happen when the beans reach about 360 to 380 degrees Fahrenheit. So while we wait for first crack, let's go ahead and decide where we're going to pull this roast. Since this is a fully washed Central American coffee, I like to pull these around full medium or full city, which is just before the second crack starts or a couple of snaps into it. And there we go, the first snap of first crack. Now personally, I like to call first crack when we hear a few snaps in quick succession. Otherwise, we're basing it off of an outlier bean, when it might just be 1 or 2 cracking. That's a bit more like it. We'll call that first crack. So at this point, I want to be sure I'm not stalling my roast during first crack, but I also want to extend the development phase as much as possible. I feel like I need a little more heat in this system, but the beans aren't moving quite enough to justify turning the fan down, so I'm going to increase the power setting and add a bit more heat. Alright, we've got quite a bit more movement in the roasting chamber now. I feel like we can safely turn down the fan once more. Once again, we want to increase the amount of the development time while not overshooting first crack entirely or stalling out our roast. So we've just heard the very first snap of second crack. While I feel like it's a bit premature to say we've begun second crack in earnest, I can tell it's coming up really soon, so I'm already considered pulling the roast any second now. But I'm gonna hold out just a little bit longer to see if I can't get a touch more development out of these beans. I'm gonna make the executive decision to go ahead and switch us to the cool phase. The beans smell amazing, they look great. I think it's time to go ahead and cool these beans. Call the roast here. So when you enter the cooling phase, it shuts off the heating element, but it can take a few seconds for the heating element to fully cool down. Expect a bit of heat momentum coming from this, which is one of the reasons I went ahead and switched to the cooling phase when I did, knowing that we might have a bit of travel time and the roast might go up just a hair darker than when I hit the button. You'll also notice down in the timer it says C3. The 3 is the number of minutes that the cooling phase is running. I notice here I'm not getting quite enough movement out of my beans, so I'm going to increase the fan while it's cooling so that I cool the beans as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through the rest of the cooling process, but you're going to notice I turn up the fan once again to keep that airflow going and the beans cooling, and I also increased the timer on the cooling phase. I wanted to add another minute just to make sure they were nice and cool by the time we were done.
You can see here a little bit of the chaff did fall back down into the roaster. It's not a huge problem. Be careful, this will be quite hot. And we're just gonna gently remove it. And all our chaff is in there. We just gotta go empty it into the trash can. And now, let's tear out our scale. And beautiful roast. Well, that about wraps it up for us today. I really hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something new. If you did, please do us a big favor and hit that like button down below. Helps us out a lot. Subscribe if you want to follow us. We've got lots of videos planned for everything from roasting to brewing, coffee accessories, you name it. Oh, and if you've got any tips and tricks you want to share, please comment it down below. I know I want to read those. I'm always learning new things every day. So yeah, thank you again. And I've been David with the Captain's Coffee. Happy roasting.